Hi, I'm Troy.
And I'm Vicki.
And we are Empty Nesters Wine. All right, hey guys, welcome back. If I got to remember, because my wonderfully smart and talented producer keeps telling me I got to remind you guys, like and subscribe to our YouTube page and our Facebook page. I keep forgetting that, so let's do that.
And our podcast.
And our podcast, which is on YouTube. Today, at the end of this podcast, we're going to be taste testing our mixed berry wine. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see how it's come along. As we were saying, our winery is in Lecompton, Kansas, and we are really looking forward to doing business in Lecompton. We've lived here for 24-ish years. We've raised our children here. It's a really nice community full of great people. I think we've already mentioned on our podcast before how when we were remodeling, we would be working for 5 minutes and someone would stop by and we'd talk for 10 minutes and then we'd go back to work for 5 minutes and then stop and talk for 10.
He mostly did the stopping and talking.
It's true.
I worked and talked at the same time.
But no, there's a lot of good people, and they were all coming by and visiting with us, very excited about a new business opening in Lecompton, and we're very excited about being here. Today we have the privilege of being visited by two of Lecompton's finest historians. Today we have Paul Bonmeyer, president of Lecompton Historical Society, and we have Tim Ruiz, administrator of the Constitution Hall. And they are a wealth of information on Lecompton. If you've seen any of our labels on our bottles of wine, we talk about Lecompton, a different aspect on every brand of wine that we have, or every flavor. And Paul and Tim are here today to give us some really good historical stories about those. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Bonmeyer and Tim Ruiz.
Thank you, Troy. Paul, go ahead. You have seniority.
Lecompton was founded in 1854 by Mr. Roderick and Nathaniel Boone's nephew. They called it Bald Eagle, but when they thought that it was going to be the capital, they didn't think that was a dignified enough name for the capital of Kansas, so they named it after Territorial Judge Lecompton. Lecompton was designated as the only official territorial capital from 1855 to 1861. At that time, an appropriation was received from the federal government for construction of a $50,000 on the Capitol building. The building was finished up to the bottom of the first floor windows when the money ran out, and the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. rejected the Lecompton Constitution 120 to 112. This followed the United States Senate having approved the Lecompton Constitution 33 to 25, and President Buchanan strongly endorsing it. So Lecompton failed to be the capital today by just 8 votes. But in the House of Representatives, they got into a physical fight over the Lecompton Constitution. And this is according to Leslie's Illustrated. 50 congressmen got into this fight. It didn't end until the congressman from Wisconsin pulled the wig off of the congress from Mississippi, held it up in the air, and yelled out, "Look, I've scalped him." But as a result of this fight, it split the National Democratic Party. So in 1860, when Lincoln ran for president, there were 4 candidates. Stephen Douglas is a Northern Democrat, John Breckinridge is a Southern Democrat, John Bell is a Constitutionalist Whig, and Lincoln won with just 39% of the vote. So it can very easily be said, without the writing of the Lecompton Constitution that occurred right here on Elmore Street in Lecompton, that the fight developed on the floor of the House in Washington, D.C. Lincoln might not have been elected president. This is not a story that we just make up, because 9 years ago when the Lincoln movie was popular, the New York Times sent a reporter and a photographer out to Lecompton to do our connection with with Lincoln. And in the process, they interviewed Jonathan Earl, who then was a history professor at the University of Kansas. He's now at LSU, and he is quoted in the article in the New York Times as saying Lincoln would not have been president had it not been for the Lecompton Constitution. This is a nationally important town, but it is not. It's almost a hidden secret as to what actually happened here and how it affected the nation's history.
Sounds like people were just as passionate about their politics back then as they are today. It's amazing to know that Lecompton had such a strong presence in the politics back then, and how fragile it really was, because we almost wouldn't be sitting here talking about a President Abraham Lincoln today. Man, I don't know what course our history would have taken. It was a close one. It's very interesting. Tim?
Well, Paul pretty much summarized, the history of Lecompton. I call it historic Lecompton. I mean, this town just oozes history. And, for example, I take care of Constitution Hall, which was built in 1856. So 2020, it's 164 years old. And it's a wood frame building built by Sheriff Samuel J. Jones, the sheriff of Douglas County. Samuel Jones owned a sawmill down on the Kansas River on Oakley Creek, just downstream from Lecompton. And he took down cottonwood trees and black walnut trees and ripped 2x4s, 2x6s, sheathing boards, floorboards, and lap boards, and brought them to Lecompton and built Constitution Hall at 319 Elmore, the building that I work at today. It's a state historic site. It's also a National Historic Landmark. And that building, Constitution Hall on Elmore Street, has been there at that location now 164 years. It's probably the oldest wood structure left in Kansas. Pretty amazing that a wood frame building would survive that long, but it's there. So one of the few buildings left in town, if not the only one left in town, that's from that heyday of Lecompton as the territorial capital of Kansas. And the building has defied all odds. So many buildings like Constitution Hall, wood structures were built, particularly up and down Elmore Street. This was the main business district when Lecompton was the capital. Became known as the Wall Street of the West of Kansas Territory. Lots of wood frame buildings like Samuel Jones's two-story building were constructed along Elmore Street, but unfortunately, through the years, a lot of those buildings burned. They fell down, they tore them down, they scrapped them out for lumber. Matter of fact, the building we're in here at Empty Nesters Winery, it was part of a series of wood structures that were built along Elmore Street during the territorial period. 1916, a major fire broke out on Elmore Street, and the fire consumed all those wood frame buildings. I think there's one building that survived, one or two buildings that survived. But these buildings were built next to each other. I think it was the butcher shop accidentally caught on fire. At that time in 1916, a lot of open flames were used in buildings. Wood burning stoves, candles, kerosene. It burned the buildings down. And then fortunately, in 1917, 5 brick buildings were constructed. One of them that we're sitting in here today in 1917 was built to replace those wood frame buildings. But Constitution Hall was never attached to any other building, and it's lived a charmed life, I always say. It's defied all the odds. It's still there today. So people come to Constitution Hall. They want to go inside. They're standing on the original cottonwood flooring. We're on the first floor where the first federal land office was open. The first pioneers that came to Kansas went into that first floor, stood on those very cottonwood planks, and filed a claim for Kansas land. And then upstairs, that was the Capitol, the temporary Capitol. They're going to build a magnificent stone Capitol a block east of Constitution Hall. That's where Lane Museum's at today, the Territorial Capitol Lane Museum. But anyway, on that second floor, as Paul said, the Lecompton Constitutional Convention convened there 163 years ago to write a constitution for Kansas. Very controversial, that was finally passed and sent to Washington for approval. And President James Buchanan endorsed the Lecompton Constitution. However, Senator Stephen Douglas, the namesake of the county that we're in, very powerful U.S. Senator from Illinois, Chicago, he came out against the Lecompton Constitution, said it was a fraud and a swindle on the people of Kansas. So the two most powerful politicians in the country in 1858, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, U.S. Senator from Illinois, and President James Buchanan, clashed over the Lecompton Constitution. and the Democratic Party split itself over it. Ultimately, Lecompton Constitution was rejected on a third and final vote by the people of Kansas, and it went down in defeat. But the blowback from the controversy over the Lecompton Constitution would be the Democratic Party would forever split itself as a regional party, north-south, and that would be the opening and the wedge that the Republicans and their candidate Abraham Lincoln would use to win the U.S. presidency, which would cost, with 39% of the vote, that's all they got. But it was enough to be declared president-elect, and the southern states began to secede, and Kansas enters the Union January 29, 1861. Lincoln is sworn in March of 61, and Fort Sumter is attacked in April 12, 1861. The U.S. Civil War begins. So if not for the Lecompton Constitution, Abraham Lincoln probably would not have been president, probably wouldn't have been Stephen Douglas, and we wouldn't have had Civil War anyway in 1861. So what happened on the second floor of Constitution Hall? People from all the United States come, historians, history buffs. They want to stand in that building, stand on the second floor where these events occurred. I mean, that building's 5 years older than the state of Kansas. It's 5 years old, 5 year older than Fort Sumter, the start of the Civil War. So somebody was actually in that building in Constitution Hall when they heard that Abraham Lincoln had been elected president, or that Kansas was admitted into the Union as a free state, or that Fort Sumter was attacked, or the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So I always say Constitution Hall has a lot of historic mystique. You can feel it when you walk into that building. And multiple times a year I'll have visitors stop by and they'll say, I want to see where Grandpa wrote this Constitution. And it'll be the fourth or fifth generation grandchildren that have come as close as Topeka, Kansas, as far away as Reno, Nevada. They want to come inside that building, stand in the very room where great-great-great-great or great-great-great-great-great-grandpa wrote that Constitution. So the building's still here in historic Lecompton. And that's why, it's never gets old going to work at Constitution Hall, open that door, because there's so much history there, and people love and appreciate that building for what it stands for. And what's the tagline, Paul, for Lecompton, historic Lecompton, the billboards?
Birthplace of the Civil War, where slavery began to die. I just wanted to add one thing. The furthest person who visited Lecompton was a professor from the University of St. Petersburg in Russia. He was touring the United States, and the reason he came to Lecompton was because he teaches United States history in Russia, and he tells his students, and they talk about the Lecompton Constitution, and he wanted to be able to tell his students in Russia that he had visited Lecompton, Kansas.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, it's amazing to know that our little town of, 700 some people has made as far as Russia. You mentioned earlier Hollywood. They came out to do some research for the movie. Reno, Nevada, Tim mentioned. People from all over the place coming and touring the place. I think it's very cool that Constitution Hall, being that old and having that much history, and it stands there right now today, just across the street and half a block down from us. And we can walk in there anytime and read, learn, listen to Tim talk, and learn a lot about that time period, which was very, very instrumental in our today activity and lives. Very cool. On our strawberry wine, the first wine that we've made as Empty Nesters Winery on a big scale, we've decided to name that Strawberry Lane after James Lane. And I believe Tim knows a lot of history about James Lane. Tim, what can you share with us?
Yeah, I know that I take care of Constitution Hall, and it was built by Samuel J. Jones. But Lecompton also has a namesake of Lane. And Paul, you want to explain Lane University and the connection with Senator Lane?
Well, after the capital was moved, the lands lay idle until it was deeded by the federal government to the United Brethren Church. The United Brethren Church decided to have a university there, and they decided that they would name it after the man who pledged the most money. James Lane was a radical Free Stater, and he seized that opportunity to try and embarrass Lecompton by having the university named after a Free Stater when the political powers were pro-slavery. He pledged $2,000. He did not fulfill his pledge, but the United Brethren Church felt like they should fulfill their pledge, and so they named it after him, and it became a university in 1865. The building on its present location was completed in 1882, and the university met its demise in 1902 when the United Brethren Church got into a major disagreement over joining secret organizations, which was lodges. And so it was weakened, and it moved from here to Holton, Kansas, then to Kansas City, Kansas, then to York, Nebraska, and finally up in Lamar, Iowa. The community building that's across the street was part of the Radical United Brethren Church, and it's significant as another name who visited Lecompton is that Orwell and Wilbur Wright's father was a bishop in the United Brethren Church, and his memoir states that he came to Lecompton and ordained 2 ministers here in Lecompton. Orwell and Wilbur Wright were not with him, but it's just another name of an important person that was here in Lecompton. And of course, in Lane University is, in 1884, President Eisenhower's parents met and were married in September 23rd, 1885. She came out from Staunton, Virginia, because her parents died and there were Stovers living in Topeka. And he came down from Topeka, and they met and were married upstairs in the chapel on September 23rd, 1885. David Eisenhower was here for our dedication, and Mary Jean Eisenhower was here when we did a reenactment. And the name Lecompton is very well recognized at the Eisenhower Museum in Abilene.
Very cool. Yeah, Lane University has seen a lot of history, along with, we talked about Constitution Hall. And now we're getting into Lane University, and James Lane, who is a very interesting character to study out. And I think next week we're going to ask Paul and Tim back and have Tim tell us about James Lane and some of the historical stories surrounding him. So thanks for tuning in this week. I'm not sure if I mentioned at the top of the podcast, but we do have a mixed berry wine that we've made a couple years ago.
Yeah, we finally got it bottled.
It's been aging nicely, and we're gonna taste that mixed berry. So it's got a very dark color to it.
Very florally.
It does smell very good. Very good. This is Empty Nesters Mixed Berry Wine, which we are not selling in our winery right now. This is
Nope.
a wine that we just
This is one we
made
made
up for fun.
Yeah, made it for fun.
It tastes very good. It's got a little dark flavor, like maybe a cherry flavor, which is funny because I don't think cherry was one of the
No, I think
berries
it's
we used
blackberries,
in it.
raspberries, and blueberries. Yeah.
But it's good. I really like that one. That's a good one. It's chilled, and even though it's a red wine, at Empty Nesters Winery, we do fruit wines. All fruit wines should be chilled to about 40, 45 degrees when you drink them. Regular grape wines, the reds, usually you drink them at room temperature, but fruit wines, berry wines are a little different. But I would really like to say thank you to Paul and Tim for coming in today. Some of the history that they shared with us is really amazing, and we're going to continue with our next week's podcast with Paul and Tim as well.
Well, Troy and Vicki, thank you very much for letting us come in and talk about historic Lecompton. It's been a pleasure.
Well, we want to thank you for the opportunity. If you want to see economic development, come to downtown Lecompton, and you'll see economic development at its best.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.